Hello, everyone. Very warm welcome to the Sino-US Scholar Dialogue Series on Public Administration. This dialogue is jointly organized by the Section of Chinese Public Administration of ASPA and the School of Public Affairs at Zhejiang University in China. So today what we have is the second dialogue in the series on the governance of emerging technologies. My name is Jue Wang. I'm Associate Professor at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. I'm the moderator of the session. So before we start the talks, I would like to invite Professor Elaine Liu from the City University of New York to say a few words. She is the section chair of SCPA. Elaine, please.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Welcome, everyone. My name is Elaine Liu. I'm a professor and the director of public policy and administration at the City University of New York, John Jay College. As Professor Wang said, happens to be this year the elected chair of the section for Chinese public administration of ASPA. ASPA stands for American Society for Public Administration. For those of you who are not that familiar with the section, I can tell you, for me, it is a community of scholars from US and China and other parts of the world who are dedicated to understanding Chinese as well as comparative public administration. We do research, we do conferences, publications, networking, and of course, dialogue series like this. So this time we share a dialogue with our Chinese partner, Zhejiang University, as well as my friend, Professor Weiwen Zhang from Zhejiang University. I know her for years and I'm glad to have the opportunity to work with her. To me, this pandemic in a way isolates us, but in many other ways, it also makes online learning communities like a breeze. So this time I welcome all the guests today, tonight, or this morning. I don't know where you are, but wherever you are, we welcome you. And if one thing that the pandemic has taught us is the importance of technology, how to harness these power, how to govern it better, how to make it work for public services. I think these are the very important topics of our time. So with that being said, I will turn it over to my friend, Professor Zhang, and I really extend my welcome to all the guests as well as participants of tonight. Thank you.
Yes, Professor Zhang is the professor and the vice dean of School of Public Affairs at Zhejiang University. She, together with Professor Liu, are the two organizers of the series of dialogue. So perhaps Professor Zhang can also say some words.
Yeah. Good morning, good evening, dear distinguished speakers, dear colleagues, and dear friends. So just as Professor Liu mentioned, this is our cooperation program in this year. So it's my great pleasure to have all of you to join these dialogues. So Zhejiang, I would like to use this time to very brief introduce Zhejiang University. It has a long history and now it has developed into a comprehensive research-oriented and innovation university with great influence at home and abroad. As an important participant and witness of China's higher education in the past century, the history of Zhejiang University reflects the development of world civilization into witness with the twists and the turns of Chinese nation and carries ideas and the responsible and intellectual everywhere. So our school is called the School of Public Affairs. So though it's very young, but it has 7 departments. It's super school. I mean, in the disciplines. It's very multidisciplinary schools. So we collaborate with SAPA to launch this program, especially in this special time. So I hope this dialogue, especially today's dialogue, are very successful. So thanks all of you. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. Very good introduction of the school and the university. Zhejiang University is located in Hangzhou. It has a very beautiful campus in a very beautiful city. Okay, so today we'll have two speakers, Professor Chan Huang and Professor Han Zhiyu. Both of them come from Zhejiang University, but from different schools. Professor Huang is a professor in the School of Management, and Professor Yu is a research fellow. Dr. Yu is a research fellow in the School of Public Affairs. So they're still quite young, but already quite established in their respective fields. Together with the speakers, we are also very honored to have two distinguished scholars join us as discussants today. Professor David Gaston is a professor and founding director of the School for Future of Innovation in Society at Arizona State University. And Professor Lan Xue is the distinguished professor and dean of Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University. So both of them are big figures in the field of science technology policy. We are very looking forward to hearing their views in the end. So without further ado, we would like to invite our first speaker, Professor Wang, to share with us his latest research. Thank you, Professor Wang.
Okay, thank you very much for Jayvon's kind introduction. So I'm going to share my screen. So you can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's my great honor to speak in this lecture series, and thanks for invitation from Professor Zhang, Professor Liu, and Professor Wang. And today my topic is IP governance in cyberspace. So I'm from a School of Management. We have an institute for IP management in the school. So I'm leading the institute in the school. So my talk is divided into these several parts. So first of all, I will talk about that in the cyberspace, we face the challenges of IP governance. Then I propose that we need to have a system of IP governance as cyberspace versus the traditional IP governance system in the offline world. So I think that online world needs a different system, and use the traditional law and rules and regulations in the offline world is not so efficient, effective in governing IP issues in the cyberspace. Then I use Alibaba as example, looking at how can we build such a governance system of IP governance system in cyberspace. Then I talk about three important parts of this system. First of all, I would like to say this system needs technology empowerment, that we need to use state-of-art artificial intelligence, big data, and blockchain technologies to strengthen the system and to strengthen the enforcements and also the rights of information, IP right of informations. And then we also need institutional innovation. And as I said, the law and the regulation of the traditional IP system actually originates a very long time ago. So in the 1474, in the state of Venice, there was a primitive version of patent law already in Venice, long before Italy was founded, was united. And then the IP clause was in the 1789 Constitution of the United States. And a lot of innovation in the Industrial Revolution era actually were patented, like the James Watt's steam engine was patented. But this laws and these rules, they are well protected. They can well protect the innovation in the physical world, right? You have an engine, you have a machine, your devices, you can patent that. But in the online world, right? Those are virtual. So a lot of innovation there, but you cannot use those the current traditional IP law to offer effective protection. So that's we need institutional innovation. And then I use the case of Alibaba's original design protection program to illustrate how important the innovation in the institution would be. And the third case I will introduce is about multi-party co-governance, right? I'm not sure whether this is correct term. I'm not expert in public administration, but I thought that's a word maybe close to the core meaning of that term from management perspective. And then I used the case of Alibaba Anti-Counterfeit Alliance as a case to illustrate how a multi-party participation can enhance the effect of the IP governance in the cyberspace. First of all, I start with that what's the difference between the IP infringements in the offline and online worlds. First of all, in online world, the dissemination of information is very fast. So the innovation is much more easily be imitated than in offline world. Because offline world, you have to see that devices, you have to see that equipment. But online worlds, you just can click the link and then you see it. Right? In offline world, you have to go to see that physical object. But in online world, it's virtual. Right? You can see it very fast and you can imitate. And then in online world, there's no limitation for the space and distance, right? In the offline world, maybe you can infringe article, infringe object, maybe it can be purchased 5,000 times a day in a shop, right? But in the online world, in the day of the W11, the online shopping festival in China, that's one day you can cause damage about tens of millions, right? Hundreds of millions RMBs if you have infringement on that day. But that day, a shop can sell half of the annual revenue in one day. So in one day, you can cause huge damages because there's no limitation in terms of space and in distance. And also in online world, the imitation and infringement can be very easily concealed, and the evidence of that is difficult to find and too difficult to preserve the evidence. So this causes huge challenges for law enforcement. How can you identify and also preserve evidence of the infringements on online world? Those are the challenges different from the offline world. So for example, take Alibaba as a case. So Alibaba platform, there's 2 billion products currently sold in the platform. So can you know any one of them is infringements? It's very hard. And then every day there were 30 million new products launched every day. So basically you have to check those products whether they're infringements, and you can imagine that the task is enormous. And then annually there were 10 million complaints by the right holders that somebody are infringing their products and their IP. So that's enormous amount of complaint that cannot be handled by human. It has to be handled by machines. And then consumers, the average shoppers, as every one of us, you can complain that there's 1 million complaints every year. So the system has to handle those disputes, right? They have to make a judgment who actually has the fault and who infringe who, and whether the right holder actually has the rights, and whether the right can be challenges and can be validated in these disputes. So all these things, if you left to offline world to handle, that the court in China cannot handle that, right? So if all these disputes go to the court, that the court will be very much overburdened and they cannot handle that. So that's why we think that we argue that there neither IP governance system online to solve these issues. So then, as I said, that's the basic argument is that the offline world, the rules in offline world cannot efficiently handle the disputes and governance issue in online world. And we need a new system to do that. So then I proposed that there will be 3 systems to do this job. First of all, I call it government governance system. I'm not sure whether this is a term acceptable in your eyes as a public administration experts, but that's what I mean. That it's a system that a government facilitate right of information protection and commercializations based on their legislation, judicial administration, law enforcement. So this is the current traditional system that is functioning at this moment. But we also need a system that is a market governance system. This system means that platform company actually, it can facilitate right of information protection commercializations based on contract relationship. So the platform company are not governed the marketplace through law because of he has to comply with law, but he also has a contractual relationship with the shop owners, with the potentially infringers, right? Because every shop owners open a shop in Alibaba or in JD or in other platform, Pinduoduo. He has to agree with the terms set up by Alibaba and the platform companies. So in those terms, the one item, most important item, is that you cannot sell fake goods, counterfeit, right? That's universal rules. Because of this contractual relationship, as long as you agree that the terms, you click yes, and then basically Alibaba and the platform company can govern, can manage the dispute because you agree with that you are not going to sell counterfeits. Right? So this market governance system is based on contractual relationship. But if there's a dispute between the platform company and their shop owners, you always can litigate in a court, right? So the public legal system is the final resort that both parties can go there and to find a justice. So the market governance system is built on the public, the government governance system, right? It's a layer that's important and it can have value added. And the last system, I call it social governance system, which means that the society as a whole should play a role here. The governments, right holders, platform company, and general public can all participate to govern their IP issues in the cyberspace on base of the rule of laws and regulations. So these are the 3 systems I propose can play a role in the whole system. Now then, we come to how can we do that? No, we understand there are 3 systems here, but how can we actually manage those huge, enormous complaints and disputes? And then I propose this based on the Alibaba's experiences. So we need, first of all, technology empowerment. As I illustrated, the human cannot handle that enormous amount of the tasks and disputes. So it has to rely on machines and algorithms. So technology empowerment is very important. And then we also need institutional innovations, right? In addition to the existing law and regulations, we need a new institution. The new institution can be proposed by platform companies, right? We need a creative mind here to create a new systems which can creatively solve the issues and address those disputes in online world. And then we need a multiple party co-governance, not only in the platform company, not only in governments, but also general public, but also right holders. We need to have a mechanism to organize them together, work together to solve the issue. So now I just briefly introduce the history of Alibaba IP protection, but I go very quickly because basically this system is developed from very primitive type of the system. For example, a mailbox, right? In 2002, they set up a mailbox to receive IP complaints. That's primitive and very low efficiency in today's view. But that was the start of the system. And then I started to develop the system, not only in the mailbox, but also online system. You can input you can type in your complaints. You can input the information to the Alibaba staff, and then later on they establish the more sophisticated system, and to work with governments, work with international grant holders to make this system more sophisticated. So if you can look at the right-hand side, the mailbox, and then to the active prevention control model. So that's a technical system on the back, and then use the sophisticated technologies to track and to analyze and to verify the fake goods, the counterfeits, and then to pass the clues to the Public Security Bureau, for example, right? And they have online, offline combined anti-counterfeiting campaigns. Right? So, and then let's look at the first cases. So the technology empowerment. So what kind of technology is used by Alibaba to fight against counterfeits? First of all, that from the shop opening, they already have technologies there, right? You have to verify that it's a real person. It's how to say, it's not criminal. It's not a person who have the history making counterfeits that open a shop. It's that a person that's what we call clean, right? So you have to verify in the beginning. Then you have to monitor the products and the marketing campaign, whether for example, you have a LV bag, right? Which is sold 300 RMB. That's a counterfeit. Okay, LV bag cannot be sold 300 RMB. So that's a clue. That's a sign that Alibaba will flag out. So this is a counterfeit. They will not allow that link to be published. Right? They will block the links before you sell anything. So the system can handle a lot of information, as I see here, the huge informations here, and the technology-wise, they are leading in the world. And then there were 12 technologies here. Well, I'm not going to be very detailed because I'm not a technical expert, but you can look at that. For example, they have models. They build models, use AI technologies, and they use algorithms. They use multiple biometric identification technologies. They use all kinds of technologies, and they can block live, right? They live scan. So the live interception. For example, if you want to launch a product with a suspicious descriptions and so on, you are not able to launch because they will block you. They will not delete the link afterwards. They will block you when you try to launch that. And then they also can have, for example, live broadcasting in China. The live broadcasting sales is the most popular, right? So those anchors, they can sell tens of millions, hundreds of millions RMB goods annually. But when you live broadcasting, they can detect whether you sell counterfeits, right? They can detect whether you are the real anchor there that sell the goods. So they have this system in place to handle that. So because of the system, basically 96% of the suspicious links were blocked as soon as they went online. So there's no time lag there. And then their consumers complain that drop every year. So this is a KPI of the team in Alibaba. So the Alibaba team's KPI is to make sure that the complaint from consumer will drop every year. And then 98% of the infringement complaint will be handled in 24 hours. That's achievement, right? So you can imagine that the tens of thousands of complaints can be handled in 24 hours. So that's to be done by machine together with humans. So if it's humans, you have to build an enormous team there to look at it, but cannot be done only by humans. And then that every 10,000 transactions, there are only one transaction are suspicious counterfeits. So that's keep that the room for counterfeits at a minimum, but they still improve every year to make this number lower every year. So this example showing that what AI can help them. For example, a lot of shop owners, they're small and micro enterprises, right? They have no money and to hire their model to take pictures for their goods. Because of that, they use the others' pictures without consent. So that we call infringements, right? Because infringement the copyrights of the images of the picture of the other shops. But you can say that they have a reason because they have no money to take photos with to hire model to take photos because they are micro enterprise. Maybe they are in a poor village. Maybe they are in their they have no conditions to do that. And then Alibaba, in order to help these people not to infringe others, they launched this AI model, which means that you just upload your picture of your T-shirt, for example. And then Alibaba will make an AI model to wear your T-shirt and show in the real picture, just like you take a short photo with the model. So they are so good because I look at that example. They're so good. I mean, I cannot easily tell this is an AI model, not a real person. So this really helped that the micro enterprises, the people with no conditions to do business and not infringe others. That will dramatically reduce infringement online. So they use technology to help to solve the issue. And then this 4-dimension anti-counterfeit model, just to, you find a clues online, you find a suspicious link information, then you find a location of that potential infringes. And then you pass that information to right holders, also to public security bureaus. And then the police can raid that shops, can raid that factories. And then this work 24 hours a day. So then the machine work with people and then they're very effective. And then that's why they can identify a lot of clues and they pass the clues to the evidence to the public security bureaus, and the police can raid those what you call the black market or black factory. They can arrest the criminals. Okay, now we go to the institutional innovation. Here, what I mean institutional innovation. First of all, we took a case of original design protection program. So today in China, if you want to have a protection of a design in a T-shirt, right, you can apply for design patents in China, National IP Administration of China. So there you probably take half a year or 1 year to get the design patents, but you only sell the T-shirt for 3 months. So then you don't bother to apply for design patents because the patent does not offer you protection for a product with only life cycle of 3 months. So that's why millions of the designers, they don't have protections because the traditional IP system does not offer protection for products of life cycle of 3 months. So then exactly this case, this designer, Shen Wenjiao, he designed this cloth prop, you can say prop, right? Hanger, okay, clothes hanger. He got this Red Dot Design Awards from Germany. This creative, beautiful design. He got a recognition internationally. But he started to sell his clothes hanger in Alibaba. And then in a very short time, there were hundreds of the shops selling the same thing, imitating his design. So he has no design patents. He has no client. So then he was angry. He was complaining, but this cannot be answered because the system cannot help him because he has no design patents. So then he wrote a famous article called "Original Design is Dead." So this article really harshly criticized Alibaba that not doing anything for protecting his design. Then he probed this article, probed that a team in Alibaba really think how can we offer protection for the designer like him, given that our currently legal system cannot offer such protections, right? So then I designed this institution that's basically to, if you, the program, original design protection program. So if you are a designer, you have a design. So you can upload your design drawings, blueprints to the system, and then the Alibaba, the algorithm will search the whole platform to verify whether you are original, you are the new, have novelty. So if it turns out you are the first one to publish this design, then you can get its certification with a timestamp from this time that you are the original design owners. So then after you get this, anyone on the platform, if they sell similar things, imitate your design, you can complain. Then the platform will enforce the right for you. So this is the right given by the platform. It works because of what they want is just this right. They don't necessarily need a right for the nationwide rights. but they want to rise in Alibaba platform. So that's enough. So this is the institutional innovation based on technological capabilities to use modern technologies to give the rights to the right holders, to designers, right? So this is helping them to have their right protection in the platform. So the last case is about multi-party co-governance. This basically is Alibaba anti-counterfeit alliance. Because the fight against counterfeit, has a usual problem is that a lot of times the confiscated counterfeits need to be verified by the right holders, whether these are real counterfeits, right? Because sometimes the counterfeits are so good that, it's as good as the real goods. It has to be verified by the right holders, whether these are really not produced by them. So then they need to involve the right holders in that process to verify the counterfeits. And a lot of time, the right holders, maybe they are not willing to participate, maybe they have difficulty to be coordinated. So those things are difficult to be done. Then Alibaba set up this anti-counterfeit alliance just to work with the brand owners, like Adidas, like LV, like all these brand holders. And then together they form this industry group. So each industry have different problems, different characteristics. The shoes have different issues. The bag has different issues. The clothes have different issues. They work together among their industry group, and then to work with Alibaba to improve their anti-counterfeit campaign effects, and work with also public security bureaus and so on. So this is the multi-party co-governance case. Okay, so just to conclude, I hope I introduced you the IP governance system in the cyberspace. So there will be, so first of all, we need that system. The online world is different from offline world. And we need that governance system and market governance system and the social governance system together to form this IP governance in cyberspace. And then in order to have this system work, we need three important parts. First of all, technology, right? We need technology empowerment. Secondly, we need institutional innovation. We need institution in addition to the current law and regulations. Third, we need a multi-party participation to co-governing the issues. Okay, thank you very much. That's all what I want to say. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Huang. That's a very interesting presentation and great coverage on the IP governance. Professor Huang is the director of the Institute for Intellectual Property Management. So he is indeed the right person to speak on this topic. Thank you. So if any of the audience had questions and comments, you can type in the chat box. We'll collect them and respond in the Q&A session afterwards. Okay, now we move on to the second talk by Dr. Yu. Dr. Yu, please.
Okay, thanks, Professor Huang. So I'm sharing my PowerPoint. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So today I would like to introduce, it's my great honor to introduce this topic about the global governance for human genome editing. So just as today's topic is about the governing innovation for the in the fourth industrial revolution, like Dr. Klaus Schwab, who is the founder of World Economic Platform, mentioned there are at least three major realms, which is the most important. The first is physical realm, second is digital realm, just as mentioned by Professor Huang. And the last one today I will talk about is the innovation in the biological realm. So in my understanding that why biological technology is so important in today is it not only because it not only changes the life of our work, of our daily life, but also gives a new possibility of change ourselves as a human being. So just like in this journal of the economists, they give such an imagination in 5 years ago to wonder whether we can have the opportunity to design a perfect baby. So luckily or unluckily, I have to say that we are now close to this reality because we have the technology we call the genome editing. So generally, what means genome editing is, as you know, that our human being as organism, all the trends, all the behavior and heritable diseases are fundamentally based on the DNA information. So what we can do now is, in fact, we can cut off whatever DNA strand we want and to replace it with a new man-made DNA strand to find a new DNA strand. So in fact, this technology is not so new because just around the beginning of the 21st century, we have the first generation and the second generation technology called zinc finger nuclease and the tail effector nuclease. But at that time, it is not such a hot topic in the society until in 2012, a new technology called CRISPR-Cas9 is invented by these two ladies. So this technology is very, very important as a new editing tool because it is very fast, very cheap, and more accurate than any previous technology. So just after 80 years that they invented this technology, these two ladies got the Nobel Prize in 2020. Then the question comes as what we can do with this new technology. Then we can say there are positive side and the negative side. In the positive side, that's just like this gentleman, Zhang Feng, who is also the most important contribution in inventing this technology, has already applied this CRISPR-Cas9 in some clinical research, like to help people to restore their visual loss, which is already accepted by the US FDA for clinical research. And we can imagine that there are a lot of heritable disease could be treated because of this new technology, and also in the industry of agricultural and animal husbandry and so on. However, on the other hand, we can see that because this CRISPR-Cas9 technology is very, very cheap and very easy to handle, there are some unreasonable approach who can use this kind of technology, such as the first CRISPR babies, who were born in 2018 by He Jiankui in a non-responsible way, that without solid scientific research and ethical review. Meanwhile, that in some countries, maybe in US, that in fact, you can just order a box of materials online to get all the CRISPR material to do this experiment, not in the library, but at the garage at your home. Okay, so these are the very obvious positive and negative sides of this application of technology. And in fact, beside of this, there are many issues need to be think about. So both for the genome editing in somatic cells, as well as in gene cells, which means this editing could be heritable across the generation. Both of them face a lot of science of technology issues. For example, about whether they are safe enough, whether it is efficiency, etc. And meanwhile, there are a lot of value-laden ethical and social issues. For example, who has the rights to do this? And just as we talk about the design a perfect baby, about the human enhancement, whether it could be aggravate the existing social or economic inequalities. And not let alone to say other spiritual, religious, and deeply personal issues. So based on all these debates and concerns, so today I would ask the question is, what is the effective governance approach for the sustainable development of the human genome editing? And I will show 3 points in today's presentation. First one is during our research, we find that the current global governance approach for human genome editing, in fact, follow a so-called Asilomar governance mode. So what means the Asilomar governance model? We need to know it that we have to say a story 50 years ago. So when in the early 1970s, at that time, what scientists do is they want to combine the DNA sources in the nature and to combine them together as a man-made DNA, which is called a recombinant DNA. So at that time, just as today we are facing in genome editing, at that time, scientists also fear the technology has considerable opportunities. But on the other hand, they are also wondering what is the potential health and environmental risks. They are unclear. Okay, so at that time, what these scientists do is in 1975, there are 114 participants. Most of them are biologics. as well as a handful of lawyers and physicians, they gathered together in US in a center called Asilomar Conference Center. So during this conference, these participants, they discussed about the risk estimated to different types of experiments, and they decided to want to apply safety guidelines according to the degree of risks. The result of the conference is called a summary statement of the Asilomar Conference on rDNA molecules. In fact, this statement is not legally binding force. It is just a statement, but it is very, very important because just 1 year later, this statement can become a basis for the US public authority as the NIH guideline, and it is also accepted in Canada and the European countries as by their public authorities as their regulations for this rDNA technology. So because of this, Asilomar governance model is established because it becomes a milestone in the history that the scientists consider that they can successfully self-regulation by themselves. And the mechanism is through this. So a group of scientists, they through some summits, conference, get some minimal conference by themselves, and they develop guidelines for self-regulation. And then because of self-regulation, they put the guideline to influence the scientific system to become the policy of some scientific academies, journals, founding bodies. And meanwhile, their self-regulation guidelines could be adopted by the public authorities at the national level, as well as in the international level. Okay, so just let's go back to the human genome editing. So in 2015, that when the CRISPR-Cas9, this community, the most privileged scientists in this community, they gathered together again, and then they ask one question is, are we at a new Asilomar moment? So at that time, in fact, different scientists have their different views, but in the real world, in the practice, in the fact, there are a lot of guidelines and statement declarations and other codes of practice, which is follow the similar Asilomar governance model, which is published. There are more than 60 this kind of guidelines. And they share some common features. This including that these governance guidelines are always developed by a commission of a small group of leading experts. They are from one or from fewer countries, and this kind of guidelines, they are supported by several influential international or professional organizations. And especially after the 2018 Hejian quiz event, some new, very, very important authoritative platforms are developed. One is the International Commission, which is developed by the Academy in Scientific Academy in US and in UK, and they invite the commission. But in fact, you can see that committee members' number is still very limited. There are only 18 committee members from 9 countries. And another platform is World Health Organization. They develop an expert advisory committee to give more guidelines, and there are only 16 committee members, who is from 15 countries. So, okay, so let's consider about that. 15 years ago, because of the Asilomar Agreement, the rDNA technology has been successfully regulated. So nowadays, we want to follow this Asilomar governance model to develop a lot of guidelines. But the next point I would like to show is we're wondering that the effectiveness of the current governance for human genome editing, in fact, is limited. Why? First, let's think about the size of the scientific community. So I just introduced that 15 years ago, when Asilomar statement was put forward, there are more than 114 participants who joined this conference. But let's guess how many people, how many scientists, they are actually working on this rDNA technology. We find this number that in fact in 1975, there were around only 30 authors who had already published related scientific publications in rDNA technology. In another word, network or the community of scientific community working on rDNA is very, very small, even smaller than the size of the participant in their conference. Okay, so we can see, but what happened in the scientific community in CRISPR-Cas9 group? So after 2012, when CRISPR-Cas9 was developed, there is an explosive growth of the scientific community. Only in 2018, 1 year, there are more than 17,000 authors who have published genome editing related publications. So it is you can imagine the number of the community of who are working on CRISPR-Cas9. Okay, so size is one thing, but another important thing is the diversity of the community. We can see here that we make a comparison between the recombinant DNA when it is invented in 1972, and after the 6 years, there are around 1,000 scientists who have published publications in this technology. And all these scientists, they come from 18 countries, and more than 2/3 of these scientists, they are based in Europe and based in North American, okay? But when we see genome editing is after 60 years of its invention, there are around 37,000 authors who have published articles related to genome editing, and they are based in 94 countries, and which is covered all the regions in our Earth. Okay, so this is the difference, right? The size is different and the diversity is different. Then the result we argue is the guidelines on human genome editing nowadays created by a limited range of actors just to follow the Arceloma model. They are in fact unable to truly reach the community and unable to truly reflect the divergent views of the whole global community. So to test our hypothesis, we make such a global survey. We sent out the questionnaires to authors, all the corresponding authors who working on the genome editing, who had published these articles in this field. Although we received the response, the rate is not very high, so the insights are limited, but perhaps it's still informative. So let's see the result. So during our survey, we selected the most important 5 guidelines, which is developed by the most important international and professional organizations around the world. And we asked our respondent, do you know about these guidelines? And the result is very shocking. You can see that around 40% and even more than 50% of the scientists who are actually working on genome editing, they say we haven't heard about the report, right? And you can see in this slide that you can see the respondents, the prevalence of these guidelines are in fact different from region to region. Okay, and meanwhile, we also asked this respondent about like, do you agree with some idea? For example, like, do you agree to the prohibition for the basic research of human heritable human genome editing and other controversial issues? And what we find that in fact the idea and the view of different scientists, they are divergent, more divergent than we can expect it if we look at the current guidelines, which seems that because the guidelines seems they already have some consensus, but in fact, through the huge global community, the divergence is still there, right? So, okay, so based on what we have do, right? We have my last point is we think that it is very crucial now to facilitate a more exclusive engagement of the global scientific community in the global governance, so to achieve a real global consensus on governing human genome editing. So first point is that we think that it is most important to invite more researchers and institutions from more countries, especially in the less developed ones, who was now excluded from this global governance arena. They should have equal chance to engage in global governance for human genome editing. So in this end, like the leading academic journals, professional conference, they should provide this kind of platform for these scientists. And international and professional organizations, they should broaden their network for this governance issue. And also more and more public and private funding agencies, they should jointly cooperation together. And the second point we want to show is, okay, so we have to recognize that it is the first time in the history of biological scientific community that the target group of global governance is so large and so diverse. So we need to go beyond the traditional governance mode in the field and biotechnology and draw lessons and get wisdom from broaden global governance practice to achieve more inclusive governance. For example, like we can learn from the UN's policy making process of SDG that to invite all the individuals to come to join in this debate about how to develop the new platform, new governance agenda. And the last point we want to show is that it is important that facilitating a more inclusive engagement of global scientific community, in fact, is the first step, but it is a basics and a concrete way to achieve effective global governance as a whole. Because first, many scholars are talking about we need to have more public engagement in human genome editing, the governance. But we think that especially from a lot of less developed countries, the engagement of scientists from their country is very important because they can bring back up-to-date information and various arguments to inform the public debates in the less developed countries. And these scientists, they are also important as policy entrepreneurs to inform their national policymakers to provide policy suggestions based on their first-hand experiments in the global arena. And they are also the key leader and the important individuals to help generate a high degree of consensus around the world stakeholders so as to establish the more stringent global rules in the future. Okay, so this is what I want to present today. And I want to take this chance to thank all my co-authors who give me a lot of support and help during this research. And finally, and thanks everyone, and I look forward to our discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. A very important topic, given people now are very concerned about the genome editing technology. I still remember how shocking it was when we first saw the news about the CRISPR baby a few years ago. Thank you, Dr. Yu. Again, for those who have questions, please type them in the chat box. We can come to them later. Now, we would like to invite our discussant, Professor Gaston from Arizona State University, to share his view on the topic. Professor Gaston has been working on responsible innovation since 2000 and is a founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of Responsible Innovation. He may bring us some thoughts on how to develop innovation in a more responsible way. Thank you. Professor Gaston, please.
Thank you so much. I know we're running a little bit behind and I'll try to be brief in my comments, but these are two very rich, very detailed, very well argued papers. And I learned a lot from the presentations and looking over the PowerPoints previously, and I hope that I don't quite have time to do them full justice, but I want to get to some points that I think are important to draw out of both of them. So to start with Professor Huang's paper, there were two things in particular that I appreciated from the paper. One, the idea of the system of governance systems, that one should not limit oneself to looking at public or government systems, private or market systems, or societal systems, and even the mention of the inclusion of the general public as an element in governance systems for emerging technologies, I think is absolutely crucial. And I'll expand on that in a little bit, because what this does, and this is sort of the second point, that governance of technology happens in all sorts of different places and through all sorts of different mechanisms. And in the case study presented, you can see the different technological, institutional, and societal kinds of responses. And that sort of illuminates the idea that governance of technologies can happen through different sets of mechanisms. Now, I don't want to go into the whole host of other kinds of mechanisms that we might look at the moment, but those were two things that I very much appreciated about the paper. One thing I'll say that will lead into the sort of synthetic critique that I have of the two papers is that you could see in the background of this paper what some of my colleagues here at Arizona State University, particularly in the law school, call the pacing problem. The idea that technology moves faster than law, or technology moves faster than the institutions of governance. And I tend to want to dispute that presumption, because it's not just that science and technology or innovation outpaces law, it's that we let it. And if we formulate the question as how does law or how does governance catch up with science and technology, we end up with a solution that's put on the end of it. And we miss the opportunity to think about, well, how can we get in front of the changes that are wrought by science and technology? And what does governance from the beginning look like? So I want to leave that with you for a second, and then now transition to the second paper by Professor Liu. And Asilomar, in some respects, is an example of trying to start governance from an earlier stage. Okay, as the empirical work that you described suggests, there were a very few number of scientists who were actually working on the technical aspects of the problem at the time. It is at a much earlier stage, if you will, than other things. But what they didn't figure out in the context of Asilomar with respect to recombinant engineering, recombinant DNA, is the answers to two questions: how to decide who decides, and who decides how to decide. Okay, so the group of people that they had there, unlike the plan that you have for putting together global consensus, was very ad hoc. They called their friends. The lawyers and members of the press that you mentioned who were there got added on at the very last minute. And in fact, those were some of the people who were most responsible for the meat of the conversation about the responsible conduct of research around recombinant DNA. So they had no real idea about the question of how to decide who decides. It was basically a collection of their friends. Second, they had no idea about who decides how to decide. They were, in essence, making up parliamentary procedure as they were going on through the meeting. And if you read the records of the meeting, and if you read the oral histories of the people who were there, and if you've not done that, that would be a fabulous thing for your project to do. And those oral histories exist in the MIT archives. It was in chaos at the end of the meeting trying to figure out how to come up with recommendations. And they were quite literally inventing parliamentary procedure on the fly. And the points that I would draw from that, and I want to say that I appreciate the paper first, for laying out a clear use cases for the contemporary CRISPR technologies, laying out the ethical issues very clearly, and indeed the central point, recognizing the need for a more participatory global approach. But I want to now join that with the sort of multi-sided, multi-stakeholder, even possibly public kinds of approaches that were hinted at in the first paper, and suggest that the framework that my colleagues and I developed in the context of a Center for Nanotechnology in Society that we ran from 2005 to 2016 might help move both of these projects along a little bit. And we called that vision anticipatory governance. That is, it tried to look at emerging technologies as early as we conceivably could, not to sort of cut the Gordian knot of what we call the Collingridge dilemma, where if you start too early, then you don't know whose interests are being affected. You don't know what the technology is going to look like. If you move on down, then the technology becomes too crystallized to be able to influence. But to give you the best chance at an earlier stage of trying to get ahead of the pacing problem, to bring different kinds of people in to decision making and to governance. And so this vision of anticipatory governance includes a foresight capacity, that is, how do we look down into various futures, includes a public engagement capacity, and also includes an ability to integrate diverse perspectives, not just from the scientists and engineers, because we don't know who is actually going to have the appropriate governing insights, but from a larger group of scientists, engineers, social scientists, humanists, even artists. And so combining those capacities, bringing them together in the work that we did in nanotechnology, we've done work in synthetic biology, we've done work in geoengineering, a little bit of work in AI and robotics, suggests to us that one can begin to make governing choices earlier in the process with a whole host of different kinds of mechanisms to make governance more effective in the ways that I think we share with the two papers. The last thing I'd like to say just very briefly is going back to Professor Liu's introductory remarks about making technology work for the public. Because I think that both papers were excellent examples of that impulse. And in the United States right now is a movement that is being called public interest technology, that has exactly that inspiration at its heart, making technology work for the public interest. And there is a group of universities, the Public Interest Technology University Network, being funded by the Ford Foundation and other funders, and being organized by the New America Foundation. And we are about to launch, there are 43 member universities, we're about to launch an international partnership program. And the kind of work that you represent here is absolutely perfect for the kind of work that we would like to see joining the International Partnership of Public Interest Technology University Network. So I'd love to continue this conversation perhaps in that domain. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gaston. Great discussion. Perhaps the two speakers can think about how to respond after we have Professor Xue. Okay, last but not least, we have Professor Xue from Tsinghua University. Professor Xue is directing the China Institute for Science and Technology Policy and the Global Institute for Sustainable Development Goals. And we invite Professor Xue to share his views on these two presentations and on the topic as general. Professor Xue, please.
Well, thank you very much. I think first of all, thanks for the organizer for inviting me to attend this seminar, which is fascinating. But also, I have to admit that indeed, actually, I know both Professor Huang Can and Professor Yu very well. Professor Huang Can worked at UNU Merit for a long time, and I've known his work for also a long time. So I think that, I think it's, you know, in a way, I'm sort of somewhat biased in a way. Professor Yu's work also, I think, as you've already seen, that I'm also part of the work. So again, even stronger bias. So I think my comments would be, you know, I would try to be very brief. I really appreciate the Professor Gaston's comments. I think, you know, it's Professor Gaston, I think it's a long time we haven't seen each other. So it's great to see that now we are meeting online. Now let me comment briefly on the two papers. I think first of all, I think the you know what the the cyber IP protection work that Professor Huang Can has presented was just fascinating. I think that I've heard the a bit story here and there, but Professor Huang Cai has presented in such a very very coherent way, and also really looked at the different aspects of how such a system can be built. I think was really great. But I think I can't help to think about in a way. I think this really shows how technology can change the governance system. So I think while Professor Huang Cai is presenting various aspects of the story here, I was thinking that indeed maybe our traditional IP protection system, particularly the implementation part, is just so challenging. So actually, given the Alibaba's platform, platform's role, how about a national IP system to adopt many of these technologies to help, so that actually that may have much broader implications for the IP protection in China. I know China has made great progress in IP protection, but still the challenge is so great, so I think potentially, the kind of technologies that's being used and the kind of system that you just elaborated, I think that indeed it could potentially have a huge impact. So that's more general. I saw that your presentation stimulated. Let me get into a few specifics. I think that of course you're looking at more of the using the technology to help with IP protection of online. But I assume that actually, this could also be used for, IP protection offline, and also particularly, I think on the not just the physical products, but also software, copyrights and so on. So those kind of what is the broader implication of such kind of model that may have for IP protection? That's one aspect I think that I think that might be interesting. The other things also, I think you talked about multi-party co-governance alliances. I think the kind of using technology institution, and also in a way the multi-stakeholder governance system. But how to avoid the alliance become a new bureaucracy? I think in a way that I think that the advantage of technologies indeed actually is cut really across, it cuts through a lot of the bureaucracy, and actually can directly using the technology to solve many of the problems. But when you have this kind of a new kind of alliance with many stakeholders involved, so what kind of criteria would you use to decide among a very complex governance model versus a more just very simple but technology-based model? And so here I think that maybe there's still some ways that we can learn from the both practice and also more more anticipatory research. So let me stop here for Professor Huang Cai's paper. So for Professor Yu's paper, I think it's very hard for me to think about anything new, because I think we worked on this for quite some time, and indeed it would be very challenging to think about something new. But I think fundamentally, I think this the question is, how do we evaluate the cost benefits of various technologies? I think this is a huge challenge in many ways, I think, in the US, in China. And particularly, how do we understand better of the risks that's involved? I think that I know in China in the last decade or so, I think there's huge debate on GM food, genetically modified products. And I think that there's a huge debate on that. I think when we talk about the risks, some scientists say, our research shows the risk is very, we can't really, it's almost none. It's a very minimal. But some of the people who are against it say, okay, but how do you know, in 10, 20 years, or a generation later? So I think, indeed, for those kind of questions, I think the current science would not be able to answer. So how do you actually, because I think, again, sometimes the risk is not just purely, objective. Sometimes, in many ways, it's, subjective. And so I think, how do we actually evaluate, recognize those risks? I think that problem we still have not had a more consensus on what's the approach to address, to recognize those risks. So I think that's sort of I think it's still, a challenge that we have to, somehow find a way to be able to have a basis to discuss, the cost benefit and the analysis, or even risk, among the sort of risk trade-offs. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is also, indeed, by whom. I think fundamentally, how do we address the, as Professor Yu has said, very diverse view of the, in a way, on the risks of the technology, and so what should be done. Of course, scientific communities are indeed critically important. But sometimes we can also argue that the people who are potentially going to benefit from these technologies, or who are going to be hurt by this technology, they also should have a say. For example, I think that I see, for example, there are indeed many people who are in a very, challenging situation, particularly because of their, either in a cancer situation, or they have some, gene defects, and so that they could not have a baby and so on. So they actually would say, "I'm willing to take the risks." But what? But why? I mean, you guys, you are not really, you are not in the same position. But how you can make decision for me, for our group? So how as a society, in a way, we respect their rights in taking the risks. So I think those are also the issues that be very hard to to ignore. And even I think of course there are also religious groups who just for the religious reasons say they are just simply some work that just couldn't be done. So I think that indeed we need to take a broader view, a diverse view into the consideration. But still, there are, even if we can open the platform and have a discussion, but still there are going to be huge challenges in reaching some workable consensus. I think that's sort of where I think that there's still probably a lot of work to be done. So let me stop here.
Thank you, Professor Xue. Great, very insightful comments. Now, I would like to invite two speakers to respond to the comments and questions. Professor Huang, please.
Okay, thank you so much for two professors' comments. So I go very quickly and briefly. First of all, the Professor Gaston's comment that about the pacing, the law, the technology progress outpaced the law amendments. I mean, that's the issue why I think we need a market governance system, because the government governance system will definitely outpaced by technology development. And then the law amended every 10 years, but technology moved very fast. So then there were room, and where the room that will be filled by the market governance system, the platform company, that actually they should have responsibility and capability to govern the IPs in cyberspace. That's my idea. That's why we need a second and third system. And about that, the vision and participatory regulation, I think that's great, a great turn and great direction for us to look at it. So I will study that. And for the Professor Xie's question, so yeah, I mean, as Professor Xie, you said about technology can change governance system, and that's exactly my point. So because of technology, we can govern more effectively, more efficiently than before. Much more powerful governance system can be built to address the challenges. So that's my point. And about whether the China National IP Administration of China can learn from the Alibaba's technologies and use that in offline world. I think that's, of course, that's good, that's possible. But I think that will be whether the other parties, how fast they can learn from the best practice in the area. I think that will be a question. So that will be related to the efficiency of government system. Whether government governance system can move fast, keep up with that multi-governance system. I think that will be a challenge for government. And the other question about that, whether there will be alliance that will be created bureaucracy there. So I think Alibaba, because those Alibaba anti-counterfeit alliance, those all are private companies. I think they will move rather fast and there will less bureaucracy there. But we will see whether the system, when they develop further, more companies joining, whether they become a more bureaucratic. We will wait and see. So that's all my response. Thank you so much again.
Okay, thank you, Professor Huang. And Dr. Yu.
Okay, thanks, Professor Greston, and thanks, Professor Xie, for your fantastic comments. So I think that both of you, and in fact, including Professor Huang, we all think about one thing is very important is the multi-actors contribution in this governance issue. And I really appreciate this idea. But I'm also have one concern. This concern is I'm thinking about such like when we talk about anticipatory governance, I think it could be very, I imagine it could be done in some Western developed countries because you have the tradition of this kind of multi-actors engagement in history, right? But when we think about that, because that this emerging technology, like the CRISPR-Cas9, it is a transporter issues. They need to be addressed. Not depends on who do best, but depends on the worst, who did the worst, because all the consequence is global. So let's think about, I'm always think about is when we talk about like the public engagement and other things, that how to achieve it in the less developed countries. As we can see, the community has covered more than 19 countries. Most of them do not have this such of tradition. So in our work, I wonder maybe the first step is that their scientists and experts can engage is the first step. But I still, maybe if I can ask this question is, do you think that there could be other ways that could be achieved this kind of anticipatory governance, not only in the developed countries, but also in most less developed countries, as well as Professor Xue mentioned about like the patients engagement in a lot of less developed countries. Yeah, so this is my response and also the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Now we will move on to a more open discussion among the speakers, discussants, and the audience. And if the audience has any question, you can type in the chat box. But perhaps I would like to start with the first question, a very general one. And now it seems because the theme of this session is governance of emerging technologies. But emerging technologies are quite diverse, and they have their particular issues and the risks. Like Dr. Yu categorized the technology into digital, physical, and biological categories. So I wonder if we want to have a sort of governance model for the emerging technologies, whether there should be a different governance model for different types of technologies. And if so, how do we decide what kind of model would work best for this particular technology and not the other? So this is quite general question, and anyone speaker discussion would like to hear your views on that.
Yeah, Professor, you can go ahead.
Maybe I can say first, and because I think this question, in fact, you are follow the idea of functionalism, which means that you think some kind of problem could be addressed by certain kinds of governance model. But in fact, it's just like Professor Garston and Professor Xue mentioned about that in the real world, it's not the real world is not work in a functionalism approach. In fact, it's who have the power and who have the ability to do something, to think about. So it not depends on which model is best, but it depends on who is in the table and what they want to do. Yeah, so this is what my idea. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think different technologies should have different governance system, right? Because they have different characteristics, different problems. But maybe you let the market and government and different parties, they work together. First, let them work, let 1,000 flourish, and then later on, we can try to summarize whether there's patterns and commonalities among cross different governance system, and then we can, I think we can theorize, we can generate the idea, generate the insights from that. But I think first I would let the market player, the government, and the regulatory agencies work together. First, let them work, and then later we start it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Actually, with that, I have a follow-up question. So if it's up to the stakeholders to decide or to work together on the governance of the technology, I think there might be quite context specific in terms of the country, the government, and also the stakeholders in particular area. So the governance or the regulation of the technology would be quite different in different countries. So, so what if the views of the different countries, the different societies on particular technologies are different? Some may favor tighter governance, or some may not. So technology may develop faster in countries without much regulations, and would this put countries with tighter regulations in a more disadvantaged position? So, so how does this balance the development of the technology as well as the regulation and the governance part, especially in the global context when different countries have different practice?
Yeah, maybe I can give a first shot. So I think that's very important, and also the very practical question. So for example, the GDPR in Europe on the data regulation. I mean, first when Europe made this GDPR, then Chinese stakeholders, companies say, "Oh, this is going to stifle the innovation in Europe." Then because China, we don't have so strict regulation on privacy and data, then we will have more room to innovate. But after some years, when we look back, then say, yeah, China maybe need that have a GDPR. So that all governments at all levels, they study very closely the GDPR and try to learn from the practice and the experiences of that. So actually, I would say that in the beginning, maybe you think that maybe it's not so good for us, for one country, but later on, you will learn from the experiences of that regulation, that policy in the other countries, then maybe you benefit in your long run. So I think the governments, policymakers should take an open attitude towards that. And other countries explore and accumulate experience. We should learn fast from them.
Yeah. I think I can just follow Professor Huang's discussion that, for example, like in the biotechnology, when I do some research on the genetic sequencing technology before, I noticed in fact that just like Professor Huang mentioned, in fact, different countries, they have different preference, but it's just not the whole picture when we consider the global governance at a whole, because we think that in fact, there are different institutional logics in the global governance issue, because the first is every country, they have their different, they are followed the governmental institutions logic. So each government can decide what they want to do. But on the other hand, because technology is not only based in one country, they have different community, which is transporter community. For example, like global scientific community, they are in fact is partly independent as what the government think about. So then that the transporter international scientific community, maybe they can prefer like to open sharing data, for example, and they can develop some governance approach, a transporter governance approach. And maybe there are also some transporter private initiative. They may they may have their standards for for business IPR protection. So they can also organize some governance approach in another way. And then it creates like just we call it a regime complex, which means that, okay, different governments, they have their views, but on the other hand, we have multi-actors in the global arena, and they can develop some governance approach, which is parallel with each other, because we don't have a global government in our world. So it's just like this way. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Gaston and Professor Xue.
So I'm not sure that this is directly responsive to the question, but I think it draws a couple of points together that I would like to make in response, and then to actually the wonderful question that Professor Yu asked back of me at the end of her response. That, as I mentioned, there are a variety of different kinds of governing mechanisms, and we saw some of those at play in the presentations, but the variety of them is much wider, and they include things that are familiar in the public and private context, like the making of standards. They are things that are vastly more informal that we often don't think about, like the role of art, humanities, and science fiction in getting people to think about these issues when there's still fantasies and fictions in the world, and so on. And there might be different sets of these governing mechanisms that are operationalizable in different ways in different places at different times. And it might be that if we think about, so over the past 10 years or so, for example, thinking about science fiction, the contributions of Afrofuturism and the contributions of Chinese science fiction writers have really been tremendous and have overturned the ways that the genre has really been created. Thinking along those lines, what are the different mechanisms that different countries with different perspectives bring toward this mode of anticipation is quite crucial. And that, I'm not saying that that's a way to actually solve the problem that Professor Yu points to, but it is a way to begin to work oneself through that problem. The second thing is that, for each of these cases, if you take an anticipatory perspective, we've already messed it up. We're already not starting early enough. And if you go back again and look at recombinant DNA and the early moments of animal cloning as well, it was the scientists themselves who said, no, don't think about people yet. We just cloned a frog. We're just barely being able to do recombinant DNA in this cell or with this virus. Don't think about people yet. Well, if we hadn't taken their advice 50 years ago, we might actually be a lot further down the line in doing this in a global way. And so the particular point is, don't take their word for it now, because we end up on path dependencies that keep us from doing it.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think that I was there's sort of an emergent call, so I just responded to the call, so I will stop. But I actually, let me respond to the question whether there's some kind of general model that we can follow. I think to a certain degree, I don't know whether that's what Professor Guston's view. That is, I think the technology and the interactions between technology and society is so complex. I think it's very unlikely that we'll be able to find one sort of, comprehensive model that can cover all the situations. Of course, we can have some general principles that we all agree, but again, those would be very general. That would be very hard to, to translate into workable system in every situation. So what I think that in the last few years we've been advocating for what we call the sort of agile governance system, that in a way to a certain degree is a bit similar to what Professor Guston was saying that actually was more of the governance system, how do we actually to adapt to the new situation. I'm not, I think anticipatory, I think would be great. Anticipatory sort of system would be great that, you can really, foresight and other things to see where the technology is going. But often the situation may not be easy. So I think, so at least, we should really try to be agile, try to be adaptive so that actually we can, to make sure that indeed we act properly in time. I think that, when, in particular when there's uncertainty is so great. So I think that's sort of the way I would say that that's at least the current, what we could do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the speakers and Professor Guston and Professor Xue for the responses. We do have questions from the audience, but for the sake of time, we may only have question for one question, may have time for only one question. So I will read the question, and because this audience prefers responses in Chinese, so I hope speakers, when you, Professor Huang and Dr. Yu, when you respond after your response in English, perhaps you can also briefly say that in Chinese. Okay, so the question is whether there are in the fourth industrial revolution era, regarding the emerging technology, whether there's technology that is really difficult to governance and whether there's technology that is impossible to governance, and what would be your thoughts on the difficulties in these the governance of these technologies, and how we can cope with these kind of difficulties.
Okay, so maybe I can just because we have time limitation, I just several sentences. I think the first thing is difficult is, I think in the nowadays, like AI, cyberspace, and also biotechnology, it's not only about the risks of uncertainty in the technical and scientific things, but it's sometimes it's about the value-laden issues. So who and whether we should do this or not, right?所以这个是用中文来讲呢，就是不仅是这个技术本身的问题，它也是一个价值取向的问题。And the second point is many issues. It's not it's a natural bounded issues, but it need to be addressed across the nations, across the human beings, because like the biotechnology, CRISPR-Cas9, it could be the consequence is heritable across generation. So we need to address together. 所以第二个难点就是说，现在有很多的技术，它不是说一个国家解决就好，它必须是全球来共同合作。因为比如说像这个可遗传的这个基因编辑，它会影响到我们全人类，所以必须我们要有全球共同的解决方案。好 ，Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yu. Professor Huang.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Yu. I think the answer is great. I mean, I just want to add one more point. What I felt that actually the new emerging technologies, actually they are moving very fast. I think that create actually challenges for policymakers and regulators. I mean, whether they can learn as fast as the technology move forward. I think that will be a challenge. Because if you don't learn with that technology developers, actually you lag behind. You have no capacity to regulate. And that's what I saw on ground. So I think that there pose challenges to governments and policymakers and also scholars, because scholars, we are supposed to support policy making, right? We cannot learn as fast as the developers, and then we lag behind together with governments. 就我的想法就是，我觉得于老师刚才说的挺好，就是我补充点就是，我觉得新兴技术发展非常快，那么现在就是等于是给政府的监管部门造成了挑战，就是监管部门也要学习非常快，如果学习不快的话，自然就不能够监管，不能够规制了嘛。所以我觉得，当然其实也给学者提出了很大的挑战，因为学者本质就是要支持政府做出正确的决策嘛。那么如果学者学习不快的话，不能深刻理解的话，那自然不能给政府提出很好的建议啊，那么自然整个这个监管的就是体系就会落后了。所以我觉得这点是我觉得新兴技术发展给就是治理带来的一个挑战。好，谢谢。
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of fundamental dilemma that whether this is the fourth industrial revolution or second industrial revolution. I think that technology development and innovation, I think inherently is an uncertain process. So that uncertain process means that we actually, before the technology comes out, we don't know what kind of benefits, what kind of risks it might bring to us. So I think that's the fundamental challenge that it's inherent in all the innovation process. So I think this fourth industrial revolution, it's the same thing. So if we can govern that uncertainty, it's no longer an innovation process. So that's what we're facing. 我用中文说呀，就是说，实际上这个第四次工业革命的这种新兴技术啊，它一个最大的问题就是创新本身就是一个不确定的，就有巨大的不确定性。所以这种不确定性的话呢，这是所有的创新、所有的研究是内生于它这个社会活动的。所以这个不确定性是我觉得是非常难以这个治理的啊。就如果你要是说我事先我都能够把它治理好，那不是创新了啊，它就已经没有创新，它就没办法创新了。所以只要有创新，就会有不确定性。这个不确定性怎么去治理？这就是你事先无法知道的，这就是它内在的矛盾。
Okay, thank you, Professor Xue. Professor Gaston, do you have some concluding remarks?
Just very briefly, if we take the uncertainty that Professor Xue just described, and we take that as real, what it does is it provides a more equal footing for experts and lay publics, for developed countries and developing countries to meet around the values that go into the innovation process. And that's a real opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Gaston, Professor Xue, and Professor Huang and Dr. Yu. For the sake of time, we have to end the session here. It's a great dialogue with very important, at the same time, very interesting topics and wonderful discussions. Thank you, the two speakers, for the great presentation, and our discussant, Professor Gaston and Professor Xue, for your very insightful comments. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Hanjun, Hangqi, and Shilei for their logistic support. Finally, thank you all, the audience, for joining us. Hope to see you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.